Okay, folks, let's go ahead and start getting this show on the road here. We're going to talk a little bit about nonfiction writing today, which encompasses actually a pretty big range of things. I haven't talked about it before because I haven't really published any nonfiction books, but I realized I've actually done a ton of nonfiction writing in general. Dozens of articles over many years in a whole bunch of different areas and to different degrees and in different fields. So I also read a lot of nonfiction, so I actually have a lot that I can say about that. So one of the things that I really wanted to start with is just what does nonfiction mean? If you come from at least the American academic experience, you're probably going to have a somewhat confused idea as to what nonfiction means. Nonfiction means just that. It's not fiction. And now it seems like a weird double negative, right? It's not true, right? Because fiction means not true. So it's true? Well, not exactly. There's different areas of fiction and there's different areas of nonfiction. And we call it nonfiction for very good reasons. The other thing is, if you're coming from the American educational experience, you're going to think that writing information is you're going to have the wrong ideas about what writing information means and what writing nonfiction means. Part of this is that you're trained to write nonfiction in a way that is both terrible for anyone that wants to read it, as well as not even functional in the academic environment. So if you maybe had an experience like me, you started having to write essays like in the 5th grade, like you had a 5-paragraph form essay where you had a thesis, and then you had these three each paragraph was covering one point of your thesis, and then you had a conclusion paragraph. And so whenever you wrote it, you had a page length. Your essay has to be 4 pages written in ink in cursive or whatever it was going to be. Your essay has to be, 8 pages. And I remember always getting annoyed at people who wrote big to get away with, the word count, or to get away with the length without adding more words or adding more content. So that's the first thing, is like people are trained all the way through the collegiate experience to shoot for a particular length and to pad out their writing in a way that makes it just awful to read. So that's the first thing. The other thing is, organizing your ideas doesn't need to be some sort of bizarre formula for how you put information. Like, oh, you got to have a thesis and these paragraphs that do this. That's a bunch of nonsense as well. And indeed, once you get into real academic writing, like if you're writing journal articles, actual academic papers that are published and peer-reviewed and that kind of stuff, that style of writing is completely the antithesis of what you actually have to do. So if you're writing actual academic writing, or if you read actual academic writing for a living, like maybe if you're a doctor, for instance, you probably are reading a lot of academic literature, a lot of journal articles in medical journals. And one of the things that would jump out to you if you were to go read those now is that they're incredibly dry by the standards that you were probably made to adhere to in your academic experience, meaning they just communicate the information. They tell you the information and they draw conclusions. There's very little writing that goes into a paper. You may have 18 months of research to write 2 pages of actual words to communicate the data that you've collected, and the rest of it might be data tables. So that's really, really important to think about. The thing is, normal people don't read academic writing either. And there's a bunch of reasons for that. And the main one is that academic writing always occurs in the context of all the facts that exist in the field. So if you're writing a paper on, the protein synthesis of like lanolin molecules in individuals affected by hemophilia type C or type B or something, right? No one is going to understand what the heck you're talking about unless they're in that field. So academic writing is always directed towards the field, whereas if you're actually trying to do a nonfiction writing in a commercial sense, that is, write for people who want to read it and get information out of it and get use out of your writing, then you have to discard both of those models. So the academic model isn't going to work because it's in the context and directed towards experts of all of the expert level information, and is very short and dry, and is intended to be completely free of anything that is not informational. Whereas when you're writing nonfiction, if you're going to write a nonfiction book or an article, same idea. You are writing to a reader who doesn't have all the information. They're not, they're not an expert. They're not. They don't have a huge number of prior existing knowledge. Even with academic stuff, you may do literature reviews and things like that. All that stuff, you wouldn't ever do that in an actual nonfiction book that you actually wanted to sell to people and you want people to read it and enjoy it and get information out of it. So when you're writing real nonfiction books, there's a whole lot more that goes into the execution of it to make it good. And in fact, I think that's another bad lesson from the academic experience or the educational experience, is that content somehow matters more than form. Or that form somehow matters more than content. No, actually your execution probably does matter more than your actual content, and here's why, is that your content is actually probably not original. Meaning other people have had the same ideas before and probably communicated them. So your goal when you're writing nonfiction is to communicate the ideas you want to communicate in a way that is as clear to the reader and interesting to the reader as possible. Not to communicate it completely original ideas. Now, your ideas might be original, you might consider them original, but if they're the most original idea in the world, but the writing is poorly executed, no one's going to read it. It's kind of like having a great story in a game with terrible gameplay. No one's going to complete the story if the gameplay is terrible. They're going to put down the game because it's too annoying to play. So you have to think about which is superior, and really the form, how you actually execute your book, is probably superior to the content. And this is a thing that kids were always saying, well, I got a B because my content was good, but I had spelling errors or something. And it's like, yeah, the spelling errors actually really matter, and your content probably was worthless and you should have been graded on the quality of your writing, but teachers didn't really do that. They didn't really do that when I was growing up, and they probably still don't do that to a certain extent. So we got to put that aside. Let's talk about what you do to actually write good nonfiction. Because there's a lot that you can do, and if you have the right approach, I think you can have success. So the first thing is, nonfiction is an extremely broad topic that covers all information that you may want to communicate to anyone ever throughout time. So most people, therefore, actually have are very well equipped to write a nonfiction book, although you may not think it, because every person has some sort of expertise that they've developed in their life, and experiences which heighten their expertise, which then have lessons which can be communicated to other people to help them and maybe entertain them, right? Stories of your life, like anecdotes of your life, are actually nonfiction writing too. But we're going to take the approach that you're trying to communicate something informational that's going to help people. That's what most people are thinking about for nonfiction. So you may write a book, Pool Maintenance in 3 Easy Steps, and that's your book. You may write a book, Never Lose a Case, How to Never Lose a Case, A Beginner's Guide to Mastering Civil Procedure. This would be a book directed towards lawyers, right? Never get a malpractice suit. If you have some sort of experience for say, like if you're a really good lawyer, you have an experience like with civil procedure, you write a book towards lawyers that deals with civil procedure, which is very complicated. And in fact, probably lawyering's some of the same stuff. Knowledge of the law is probably inferior to knowledge of procedure, because procedure, if you master the procedure of the courtroom, you can control what is actually argued legally. Just very powerful. So being able to do that, you could really capture a lot of attention that way. Maybe you're an expert teacher, like you're a teacher and you've had a bunch of years, and you're really good at classroom management, and so you write a book on great classroom management strategies, and it'd be like loving your class, or the best class on campus, how to manage your classroom effectively and with low effort, right? You have a attention-grabbing headline and a subtitle for your book. And from there, you're going to try to hook your reader into what you're doing and sell them on the information that you're trying to provide them. So if we use the teacher one for an example, we're going to hook them in with this idea. Hey, we're going to give you classroom management strategies so you have the best class on campus. And you're like, have the best class on campus. What does it have to do with classroom management? If my class is full of maybe this class has smarter kids in it. It's like, no, that's not what makes a good class. So you could lead with an anecdote. You want to personalize what you're doing there and really sell them on the idea that you're an expert, and then you have information which is going to be useful for them. So you lead with an anecdote about how, like, when you first stepped into a classroom, your first day teaching kindergarten involved a kid like stabbing another kid in the ear with a crayon, and one kid throwing up into the drinking fountain, and you have like a horror story. Well, if it's humorous, if it's really bizarre, if it's really horrible, that hooks people into the reading, makes people actually care about what you have to say. And you say, flash, I had this day 5 years later. I was helping another teacher to avoid this, and my class was the best on campus, and I can show you how to have the best class on campus. From there, it's all about organizing what your ideas are, and so your chapters are just going to be an idea area that you want to provide a lot of information for, and that's pretty much how you organize the book until you're finished with it. You don't have to worry about, you need to forget most of your educational training when it comes to actually writing nonfiction. Now I'm going to give you a couple notes for this as well. So the first thing that you should actually avoid is padding as much as possible. It's better to have a short book that is really to the point and is really informational than it is to have a book which looks like it's full of information but is full of things which aren't relevant to the points you're trying to make. In fact, I don't remember who was saying this. I've had a friend say, like, it's okay to skim nonfiction books because most of it's just fluff and padding. And it's like, yeah, a lot of nonfiction books, that's the case because we want it to look like a book rather than a booklet or something like that. But if all the information you have can be fit into a shorter book, to me, as a reader, when I look at a short book and it's like, that's a short book and it's promising a lot, and you open it up and it delivers on that promise, it's very satisfying. The more efficient it is, the better. I think Milton Friedman's Capitalism and Freedom, which is a massive explores like every area of capitalism, was like originally 100 pages long or something. Like it's pretty short, and it was just based on some lectures that he had, like 10 lectures he had. So if you keep it short and to the point and direct, that's going to be better than padding it. Now, that's not to say it should be dry like academic writing, but rather you have to figure out how you're going to contextualize it for your audience. So anecdotes are one of those things that it's good to lead with anecdotes, but you actually want to avoid having lots of anecdotes in nonfiction writing because it interferes with the reader accessing the information. You only want to provide anecdotes when it's directly relatable to a point that you're trying to make. From there, there's a lot of technical strategies for explaining what you want to explain. And being a teacher for so long and writing so many articles, there's a couple things that I can give. So the first one is, the more ways that you can explain something, the more likely you are for your instruction to actually take hold. So just to give an example, so you usually do things 3 different ways. 3 different ways is what's good to do. So the first way is you directly explain it in whatever simple and technical terms you need to explain something in. The second way is you do what's called deeper terminology. You go through those terms and you explain those in different ways so that the terms are fully explained, and then return back to the main idea, which will give it a broader context and reaffirm the meaning of the language that you're using to explain the idea. And the third way is through analogy. So analogy is really a way that is an extremely effective communication tool, and it's something that you can use to instantly help people make the connections in some sort of statement. So I don't know, if we're writing a book on like monetary theory or something, and you're like, well, the total quantity of money is defined as cash plus deposits, and it's actually more than that. It's like cash plus deposits plus promissories of different varieties, but we'll just do cash plus deposits, like the simplest idea, because deposits can mean a lot of things. So you say it's cash plus deposits. What this means is that there's a total amount of currency, which is physical money, the bills that are in your wallet, and there's also a bunch of things that we trade as if they are real money, and those are deposits in banks. So now we've gone a layer deeper, and we can go even deeper. So you can explain how the quantity of money is increased through fractional reserve banking. So you have a thing that's a deposit is, when you have your bank statement, you have the ones, you have a bunch of ones and zeros, you have a bunch of numbers that exist as your bank statement, and you act as though that is cash money that you have on hand. You write checks for it, you you plan for the future as if that money will be able to be readily turned into cash or traded. And the reality is you don't usually transfer it into physical cash. You write a check, which is a trading of a deposit. So you're acting as though that deposit is money. When you're saying, well, of course, well, the deposit is money, right? Because the bank has my money. It's like the bank doesn't have your money because the bank lends out money. So when you make a deposit of $100, the bank keeps some of it in reserve, say $10, which I think is the standard here, and lends out $90. When they lend out that $90, of course, eventually gets deposited back into another bank, either the same bank or a different bank. But the point is it gets redeposited. So when the bank has the $100, they actually have only kept $10 of the physical currency in reserve. The rest of it, they loan out, but they still tell you that you have $100 and that you have $100 to spend or to trade or to do things with. So they pretend that that $100 is both, an asset, and the $90 that they lent out is actually an asset because they can call in that loan. So they end up with basically making $190 out of $100, but the next bank takes $90. So you explain how this works, and you go a little deeper. So that'd be step 2. You go deeper. You go with a deeper explanation of all the terminology. And then you do an analogy. It's kind of like trading deposits. It's best to think of deposits as something that act like money. We all pretend they're money. We all accept them as money, but we know that they aren't real money. And it's just like gold in World of Warcraft. You use gold in World of Warcraft just like it's money. You trade it to another player for an item. You do things and you receive it as a kind of wage when you turn in a quest. When you buy and sell things on the auction house, you have that money transferred between players. But the gold isn't real. There's no physical gold that makes the gold in World of Warcraft. We all pretend like it's gold. And so that's the way deposits work. So you do those 3 different layers. And right there you've explained, basic concept of monetary theory, the quantity, how the quantity of money is determined. So if you do those 3 steps for any complex idea that you want to explain, you'll find that most readers are going to get that. And if you hand it to somebody who doesn't know, say, monetary theory in that example, and they read it and they're like, oh, you know what, I get how cash is actually, I get how the total quantity of money is cash plus deposits, because both of them are traded as if they're money, even though deposits are pretty much pretend money, right? Because of fractional reserve banking. They'll be able to explain it to you, which is great. Here's some other tips for explaining information. How you categorize things and how you organize things can be influenced by a couple of things. So here's some things I've learned from experience. Number 1 is the number of items in a list should be 3 or 5, never 4. And if it's more than 5, there's problems. So just as an example, those of you who are Christian, if you just have someone say, hey, what are the 10 commandments real quick? Most people, even like very, people who are raised Christian will get through like 8 or 9 of them and have to really rack their brain to think of 10. A list of 10 is difficult. A list of 3 is easy. If it was a set of 3, it was 3 sets of 3 commandments, you'd probably remember it better than like 1 set of 10 commandments, because you start in there like, okay, have no other gods before me, don't take the name of the Lord's name in vain, keep the Sabbath day holy, don't murder, don't steal, don't commit adultery, don't covet. And you start like, oh, I got through 8. What are those last 2? Don't no false witness. Okay, I got through 9, and then you start getting confused about what that 10th one might end up being. And so it's an interesting phenomenon. But things of 3, remember, like you just remembered, I gave you a step of 3 to do. You explain the concept, you go deep on the terminology, and then you give an analogy, and people remember it that way. Okay, so sets of 3 or 5, for whatever reason, 3 or 5 works best. 3 is better, but I do 5 a lot. So I have my 5 stages of corporate IP ownership, my 5 steps to fake news that I talk about on Twitter all the time. This is these 5-step processes. People immediately get them, and they're like, oh yeah, that's phase 1 creation, that's phase 3 milking, this one is death, this one's reboot. If they're thinking about fake news, it's like, oh yeah, this is the headline part, this is the correction part, this is, you have each of those steps, and people can remember them really well. So 3s or 5s are the best way to have lists. So if you have a list of anything that goes through there, 3s, 5s. Sorry. 3s and 5s are by far the best way to list any kind of information. And if you have more than 5 things, it's probably better to do 2 separate lists. Try to break them into 2 subcategories. Here's the, category A list. Here's the category B list. And that way people can really further create a field of categorization for when you're communicating information. Now, the great thing about independent publishing is that there's no minimum book length. You can make it a really short book and have it be really useful, or you can make it a really long book. In most cases, I find that independently published nonfiction works tend to be more to the point than those that are published by the big publishers. Big publishers are always adhering to some idea that a book needs to be a certain length, whereas the independent guys don't have that. They'll write a 40-page self-help book and it'll be really effective and really good, or they'll write a 40-page book on some other topic they want to write on, and it ends up being very, very effective. So those are some things that I think are important as well. Some of the things you don't really need to worry about when you're writing nonfiction is doing a lot of citations. Now, you want to do some citations if you are really citing some evidence. A lot of times you're talking about experience, you're giving a method for teaching or something like that. So you don't need to do citations. And if you're writing nonfiction books, citations are not done in the academic way. Usually you have them as footnotes or endnotes. Pick one, doesn't matter. And then you may have like a, works cited at the end, or just like a list of like a bibliography or something like that people can look up at the end. Or you can just quote what you want to quote directly in the text and say where you got it, and chances are you don't need a footnote. Nobody is double checking this. This isn't an academic paper. So another thing that you're trained to do, which is completely bizarre and stupid, is to look up a bunch of other people's ideas and put them in, synthesize them into an essay and have a bunch of footnotes and endnotes. That's dumb. Nobody wants that. Now you should have those if you say, hey, scientists have proven that this and that and the other, right? Scientists have proven this and that. Then of course you want to cite your evidence. But for the most part, you don't need to cite evidence about some anecdote, and you don't need to assemble other people's evidence into some heavily footnoted garbage essay for your graduate school class. Like, you just don't have to do that. Most of the writing that you do at the college level is going to be completely the opposite of anything anyone would want to read, and anything that would be effective for communicating your information. So we used to get things like the essay has to be 5,000 words long. Like, okay, 5,000 words, has to have at least 20 citations. So think about asking someone to write, I want you to write me an informational essay that has 20 citations of other people's ideas. It's like, if you're doing anything that's worth reading, it's going to be original ideas or your ideas, not let me synthesize 20 other people's ideas. But we had to do this kind of crap in music all the time. I couldn't actually write a critical essay. I had to cite other critical people's ideas. Of course, they didn't have citations, right? 19th century critics they weren't citing anything. They were just analyzing and telling their opinion, right? So you don't have to worry about stuff like that. The more that you forget about academic writing, the better you'll get at writing an actual nonfiction book. It's good if nonfiction books are also entertaining. An entertaining nonfiction book can have a lot of little things in it that you would say would be stylistically bad in any kind of formal writing environment. So you can stop in the middle of a thing and say, I know what you're thinking reading that. You can break that fourth wall. You want to do that kind of stuff. You want to have a relationship with the reader when you're writing nonfiction that keeps them interested in what you're doing. I know what you're thinking reading that. More on that later. You get someone to keep reading the book a little bit deeper into what you're doing. I find I can blast through nonfiction books very, very quickly if they're well written, because the information's so interesting. Whereas if it's a bad nonfiction book, it's like impossible to read. So anyway, that's a lot of tips that I would give for how to write nonfiction, how to go about it. I did mention at the beginning a couple of title things. So here's a couple guidelines for titles. Remember, nonfiction, you want to sell somebody on the ideas that are in the book right away. So, think of your favorite nonfiction book. The Black Swan. And then you have a subtitle. So you have an attention-grabbing title, and then you have a Skin in the Game, The Hidden Asymmetries of Everyday Life. That's a Nassim Nicholas Taleb nonfiction book. Also very low on like footnotes, that particular book. You may pick a title that's more, whatever your subject matter is going to be. You want it to sell somebody on an idea. The best class on campus, Never worry about money again, if you're like a financial guy. Your music theory is for everyone. Why music theory is great. You could have anything. Be a yoga master. 60 days to a healthier, fitter you. If you're doing personal exercise or diet or something like that. Never diet again. And then you have a subtitle. Never diet again. How to establish a long-term eating plan full of great food that makes you look and feel great. Right. And you've sold them on the idea that you have there. Gorilla mindset. How to control your thoughts and emotions to live life on your terms. That's actually a great nonfiction book title. And Mike Cernovich, you can hate Mike Cernovich if you want. He did a lot of research on writing self-help books before he wrote his own self-help book. And, the ones that he had, he's like, I may drop the gorilla mindset and just have how to control your thoughts and emotions to live life on your term. From a very influential self-help book called How to Win Friends and Influence People. You're selling an idea. The idea is you want to have more friends, you want to influence people. How to do that, right? So that's what you really need to think about with titles. You're always selling somebody. You always want to have an attention-grabbing title that goes directly into the subject matter, is telling people exactly what they can expect out of it. And then you want to hook them on the early pages and then go from there. So, and then present all your information in as organized a fashion as possible. And that's writing nonfiction, guys. So let's take a look at the chat and see what's going on today. We don't have a ton of people watching. I think there's 41 right now. So I'm so glad to have you. Just as a reminder, please do hop on my mailing list, dvspress.com/list, the main mailing list. That should take the freebie one off. Don't worry about the freebie list. That's going to be just folded into the main list after a while. And I'll just have people unsubscribe if they don't like my content. So make sure you're on the list for the dark times when I won't be on YouTube anymore. And keep appraised to my books. Current book is City of Silver. This one came out on November 1st. People are really liking this one, even though it's one of my earliest books that I wrote. And I hope you'll check it out. It's some people call it gunpowder fantasy. There's guns in it, and it's fantasy. I like to call it 310 to Yuma, but fantasy. So check that one out. I should have another book coming out. I'm going to try to put it out on December 1st. I'm going to finish it up tonight. I'm going to edit it. I'm going to try to put it out on December 1st. It's a straight horror book, and I haven't figured out a title for that one. So we'll see how that one works out. And then Moonsong 2 will probably be the next one. I got so many books that I've written and I haven't published. And I need to just edit and publish them. Just kind of been waffling on them. So I'll be stick around for 2020, please, because it's going to be a big year full of lots of books for me and maybe some music too. We'll see.